Hello and welcome to MC Webinars. Thank you for joining us today. We're running, as you are aware, the first of our series of webinars today, all of which are hosted by MC's Director of Economic Development, Will Cookson. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please put them in the questions box on your control panel and we will endeavour to get to those at the end of the presentation. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with the recording and slides from today's presentation, so keep your eyes open for that. So without any further ado, hi Will.
Hi Debbie, and greetings to everyone that's joined us on this this morning towards the end of May. Yeah, as Debbie mentioned, we're running a series, a three-part series, really focused on rebuilding local economy after, I'm going to try not to use this word too much, but an unprecedented, there I've done it once, you can keep count, year of disruption. There's going to be questions obviously about your local economy that are going to arise from that. And what we're going to explore today should help with that. Do, as Debbie said, raise any questions that you may have as we go through. Right from the start, I want to mention as well that obviously we're going to be looking at a kind of UK picture, and we've got some examples around particular regions. But if you want to have a consultation about your area, that will be in the follow-up email. There'll be a link and you can book a 30-minute session. Do that promptly, as there are only a limited number of spaces, and those consultations will be with myself, the Director for Economic Development. So moving on, just wanted to say, for anyone that doesn't know MZ, essentially we are on a mission to help organisations and individuals make better decisions about the world of work. And we see skills, which you see right in the middle as a connecting point in this diagram, as being absolutely key to that, and a better understanding of skills, I should say. We work across a range of different organisations, and what we're doing, and this is worth pointing out, is we're bringing together different data sets, and these are represented at the top of this diagram. So on the far left-hand side, you've got structural labour market information that comes from official government sources, which we model into a proprietary data set. And then you've got sources of big data in terms of job posting, analytics, people's online profiles, their resumes, where they're looking for work or they're employed and considering their employment options. And from that, we're able to extract really interesting information about the way that individuals or employers that are recruiting define their skills. And that's where MZ Skills materializes. Work with a range of different organisations, everyone within the education world. That's everyone from independent training providers through to universities and further education colleges, to help them with their planning around curriculum, first and foremost, but also student engagement. We work with local government and local enterprise partnerships, mayoral combined authorities, to help them with regional planning activity. And then we also work directly with employers, welfare to work organisations, and people really around recruitment and HR activity. So a broad range of organisations are using the data that we're going to be looking at today, which brings me on to what we are going to be exploring today. So obviously for over a year now, and going back over time, we've been tracking how the labour market has been impacted more broadly. Over the last year and since the first lockdown, we've been really focused on helping organisations and our customers understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while we're in a slightly different phase now and there's a focus on recovery, there's still a real need by our customers to use that insight to help them identify priorities for targeted interventions. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through today's webinar. What we're going to do right at the start is we're going to explore the current labour market, focusing in on specifically occupations and skills. And that's really the focus of today's webinars. Next week's webinar will be looking more at industries and sectoral impact and planning activity, but today we're going to be looking at occupations and skills, which links very strongly to obviously employment opportunities. We'll be looking at practical ways in which our analyst tool, which is used by the majority of our customers, can be used to understand impact and recovery. That will be useful if you are an existing customer, but also give you an idea of how our tools can be applied to the current situation. And finally, we're going to share details on how you can better understand your local economy. So going back to that consultation opportunity that I mentioned at the top of the webinar. So how is the labour market tracking at present? Now, there's quite a lot to describe on here, so bear with me slightly. This is looking primarily at job postings, and it's looking at how job postings have changed between lockdown 1, which you can see on the x-axis there, with a range that goes from 0% change on a year ago from lockdown 1, and goes down to -65%. Now, what we've done is we've taken all of the occupational groupings of standard occupational classifications, and we've grouped them together. So SOC classifications 1 to 3 are that dark blue, and they are primarily high-skilled roles. Medium skilled roles are green, which would be SOC 4 to 5, and we've got service orientated, which would be yellow, which is SOC 6 to 7, and then labour intensive is that light blue, which is SOC 8 to 9. Now, we've done that because we want to be able to explore whether roles which have particularly been associated with certain skills, whether those have been impacted over time. On the y-axis, we're looking at lockdown 2 and 3. And again, we're comparing the change between March and March back right at the start, actually probably before it was showing in job postings of lockdown 1. So pre-COVID March to 2020, or at the very start, with March 2021. And there's a range there from plus 30%, i.e. job postings are up 30%, down to -80%. And the average dotted line for lockdown 2 and 3 is at -20%, and the average, which is that dotted line for on the x-axis for lockdown 1 is -35%. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take you through some of the different occupations groups and how they've tracked over time. Now, it's also worth mentioning we've got quadrants here. Top right-hand quadrant, if you're up there as an occupation, then you've been pretty good throughout. Recruitment activity is carried on regardless, and in some cases has increased above the level that you would have seen in those pre-pandemic times. In terms of the top left, that's where we're starting to see, particularly if we focus in on lockdown 2 and 3, we're starting to see recovery, and we're starting to see occupations bouncing back in terms of recruitment activity and the volume of job postings. In quadrant in the bottom left, those are occupations that have been weak throughout. So the recruitment activity has been lower, significantly lower, and it hasn't really got back to where we would want it to be over time. And obviously this is something that is changing month on month, and it will continue to change. And we'll have a look at some more recent job postings activity as we go through today's webinar. So I'm going to quickly take you through a whistle-stop tour. Over here you can see care and personal assistance, health and social care. So these are health roles over here on the, and protective services as well. And those are all doing fairly well, which is interesting in itself. So just to recap, we've got caring personal services, had a low of -10% in lockdown 2 or 3, so service orientated in terms of skills levels. Health and social care professionals, high skilled roles, had a low of 8%. Actually, has been pretty safe, as you'd imagine, right the way through. Protective services, it's gone down to a low of 13%, but not significantly low. And protective services obviously includes emergency services and security. So you can see there that those roles in those top right, health, emergency services, have been pretty buoyant throughout. Next, we look at the bottom left, right far left, we've got textiles and printing and other skilled trades, medium skilled, and it's got a low of 74.9% in lockdown 2 and 3. And there may be good reason for that. It may be that it's requiring close proximity. It may also contain some industries that have been undergoing some decline, but what we haven't seen is we haven't seen those industries bounce back yet. So some cause for concern there. Bear with me a second. Oh, we've gone right back to the start. Bear with me. I'll just do this. I won't pause it again. We'll just run straight the way through and I might recap at the end. So as I mentioned, elementary admin services there, we see lockdown 1 and 2. So that dark blue one there has been slightly low throughout. And then recovering, we see science, research, engineering and technology, and skilled construction right the way up at the top. And skilled construction is up to 28% rise on this time last year when we looked down at lockdown 2 and 3, whereas in lockdown 1 really impacted at -41%. And we'll dig into that a bit more. So skilled construction, we've seen a nice recovery there. And also science, research, engineering and technical professionals. Again, we've seen in lockdown 2 and 3, it's got back to basically the levels that it was pre-pandemic. Lockdown 1 though, significant reduction, sort of down by 35%. So we can start to see where recovery is. And like I said, we'll be revisiting that in a bit more detail shortly. Because what we can also look at is we can look at how recruitment activity is tracking across all of these major standard occupational classification sub-major groups. So we've got occupations grouped together. You'll see a dark black line there, which represents the start of lockdown. And these figures here go right the way up to April 2021. And you can see, if you look at the top left-hand corner, administrative occupations not got back to the higher level or the level that we would expect pre-pandemic, and so there's some recovery still to go there. If we go over and look at caring and personal services, been pretty good throughout. A bit of a dip there last year, in the middle of last year, but fairly good. And you've got to remember, job postings do go up and down month on month. One to mention, protective services occupations, again pretty solid throughout. And then if we were to look at construction, right down here in the bottom left hand side, you can see there got really low in May last year. That was its low, and then it's picked up considerably and it's carried on to pick up, and we're back to way above levels that we had in early 2020. So some really strong recovery taking place there. As you'll be able to view these in more detail, these are at a UK level, and like I said, that's the picture up till the end of April. So that's a quick recap of what's happening, and there are ways in which we can dig into this by looking at how this can be applied within MZ's analyst tool. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a look at how you can use analysts to determine which local occupations have been hit the hardest, how that impacts tracked over time. We'll also explore a bit how you can extract where the skills demand has changed. And then we'll look at how you can use that insight to identify priorities for targeted interventions and how our customers are using that within the local government and local enterprise partnership space. Now, I mentioned earlier on the slide that you can group occupations together by skills levels, and you'll see over on the left-hand side here, that's what we've done. We've looked at here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify major occupation groups, their skills levels, and then look at that in terms of job postings, activities. And you can do that by an area. So you can do that by a local authority area, or you could look at a region, or your own geography as you define it. And obviously you can do comparisons as well. And what we're really trying to do is understand the impact on recruitment, but also factoring in particularly have particular skills levels been impacted more so than others. And that does start to show some interesting things. So for example, here what we're looking at is we're looking at all job postings across West Midlands, January 2016, whole spread through to April 2021. But focusing in, if you look at that January 2020, you can see here things were going, they always dip around December. January 2020, quite normal, February, and then March, April, and we've got that low in May. And then we see some recovery, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, dip in January, and then kind of back to where we were at the start of 2020. So quite a solid, although it's been impacted, you can see there the impact was more on lockdown 1 rather than 2 and 3. And essentially we're back to where we would expect to be for those high skilled roles. That's probably the same sort of picture for middle skills, so I won't spend a lot of time on that in this example. We will come back to middle skilled occupations slightly later. If we look at service orientated, well, you'll see here it tells a very different story, and you can imagine why that would be. That would be primarily because this will also include retail, hospitality, some of those visitor economy type roles, which we know have been significantly impacted. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and you can see that low just carries on. Some pick up in autumn, and then obviously it drops down significantly as we go into lockdown 2 and 3. And we're nowhere near back to those pre-pandemic levels. Obviously, we're in a process of hospitality, visitor economy, all of those types of roles are starting to open up. And assuming that things go in the right direction, we'd expect to see some really strong recovery there over the next month. But you can see very different to those higher skilled roles that we were looking at previously. And then if we look at our labour intensive, and this would include things like construction and manufacturing, much stronger recovery than we saw with the service orientated roles. We can see here it climbs steadily after that kind of peak around a low around May. Never really, despite a lockdown and a decline, never gets back to those levels, and you can see the recovery here. Obviously April, March picking up, and we'd imagine that that will carry on as well. And we can see that if we look more broadly. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at each of those groups of occupations and how job postings have fared at a UK level, and this dark line represents the levels that we were at pre-pandemic. And obviously, as I mentioned before, service orientated isn't back to those levels, and it really depends on the recovery in hospitality. Middle skills, some way to go, not the same as high skilled, and we'll see that in terms of some of those admin and secretarial type roles. And that will hopefully happen as offices have started to open up during April and May. Maybe that recruitment activity will pick up, and we'd like to see that happen, obviously. And labour intensive tells that story of construction and manufacturing, really learning how to operate within lockdown 2 and 3. And again, we'd expect quite quickly to get back to these higher levels that we've seen. Obviously, that's That's quite useful for understanding impact in terms of what's happened in terms of job postings, but there are other ways in which we can look at this as well and understand the impact over time at a local level. One of the things that we can do is we can look at the occupation trends. So what we'll do here, and this would be how we'd do it in our analyst tool, is we'd look at a particular sector. In this case, it would be hospitality, our food and beverage cluster. And what we would then do is we would define the geography, which we've done here for West Midlands Combined Authority. And quite quickly, that will give us the top 10 occupations associated with that particular sector. And you've got job volumes here based on structural data and how that's apportioned across the defined sector. And then what we can do is we can take all of that and we can run that into our job postings analytics report. What we're doing here is we're looking at unique job postings and the trend and how that's tracked. And what we're doing is we're looking at whether new jobs are being recruited to and created. And this will show us the impact of lockdowns. And that's really evident in the postings here. And you can see February, March, April bottoms out around May, but then also gets to almost that level as we get to February this year. And we're starting to see some recovery, probably as people prepare for the opening up that has started to happen. And we'd hope to see more of that in May's job postings. And then obviously what we can do is we can look right into May, and we can see here we're 52% up on this time last year when we look at job postings activity. Now the challenge is here is that one of the low points of last year was May. So we'd want to see 100% recovery or more. So we're up on this time last year, but that's not really enough. There's more that we need to see in terms of recovery. I wanted to point this out just to be able to show you that we've got that daily view, so we can look over the last 30 days rather than just being able to view it on a monthly basis. So you can see what's happening in the here and now. Now we can see something very different if we look at construction trades. So again, we picked the top 10 occupations associated with construction trades, and it really shows a different picture, much less impact in terms of lockdown 2 and 3, and really, you know, starts to recover quite nicely and pick up. And we're at levels now way above, going back to, you'd have to go back, I think about January 2017 to get anywhere near the same level. And that's obviously because the construction trades have learned to be able to trade and being able to trade throughout and work in a safe way throughout lockdown 2 and 3. And obviously there's a backlog probably of development activity, whether that's building of houses or more or large scale developments that needs to be delivered in a prompt manner. So there's going to be plenty of recruitment, we'd imagine, and continue to be in that particular industry. Just to give you an overview, what we can see here and what we're doing here is we're taking the skills. So these are the skills defined by really the most highest climbing skills that we've seen over this period. And the period we're looking at is we're looking from the from quarter 1 2020 through to comparing that with quarter 1 of 2021. So this is how skills demand has changed, and we're keeping those high level occupational groupings: high skilled, middle skilled, service orientated and labour intensive. And you'll see here those high skilled roles really digital and tech dominated. But yeah, Amazon Web Services coming through there as well. Obviously, big boost in terms of e-commerce, cybersecurity in there as well. In terms of middle skills, You see public liability coming through, but also finance and skilled trades recovering as well. So carpentry, boilers, plumbing, those skills are coming through and are growing. In service orientated, real focus on safety around personal protective equipment, but then also caring roles, health and social care really dominates there. And then in terms of labour intensive, we've got personal protective equipment. People want to know that people can be safe. And we've got warehousing, as you'd imagine, and logistics, which we know is aligned with e-commerce. So you can see there, these are skills that have grown significantly based on comparisons to a pre-pandemic level. There are other views that we can take as well. One of the things that we can look at is we can look at automation, and all of our occupations data is mapped across to an automation index. This is very much a high level view, and essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the tasks associated with or the tasks that are at risk or high risk of disruption through automation, and the type of technological change that we're anticipating over the next 20 to 30 years. So the index runs to 100%, and you can see here, and this is what I really wanted to point out, you can see it's probably common sense, but still worth being aware of, that elementary occupations are at the highest risk, and the higher level skilled roles have generally lower levels of risk when it comes to automation. And we can provide this in a much more granular way. If you wanted to look at that and how it's represented in your area, do make contact, and we can do that through the consultation that I mentioned at the start of the webinar. So all of that is just a glimpse of the type of insight that we have within our analyst tool. It's being used by a whole range of customers. These are just customers within the local government and local enterprise partnership space. And how are they using, how are they really using our insight? Well, there's a number of uses, and I guess the key thing we're finding is that there's a real focus on the benefit of being able to track job postings and recruitment activity in real time, because we're having such a fast changing, so many changes are happening at a fast rate at a local level within the economy. So being able to track and monitor is one use case. I mean, it's important, but also we find our customers are very keen to understand their comparative strengths compared to a national average. And that might be a sectoral strength, it might be in regards to a particular skill set that they have within their resident population that employers could tap into. Obviously, our data is being used to inform strategic planning, but then critically, it's also being used to bring in evidence base to funding applications. So if we think of the recent applications for the Community Renewal Fund, MZ data is being used within those, and then obviously with half a mind on the replacement for the European Social Fund in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund, in terms of providing an evidence base that can be used to really define your area and the needs of your area. MZ's insight can really help with that. Identifying opportunities for further development, and those may be in terms of employment opportunities, and it might be about work that you want to do with stakeholders such as Job Centre Plus, for example, your training provider community in terms of further education colleges, universities, and particularly you may want to target specific interventions where we know there's been a lot of disruption over the last year, and maybe to look at some of those challenges that we saw there in terms of automation or lower level skilled roles being particularly not quite seeing the recovery that we would want to see in terms of recruitment activities, and other opportunities to work collaboratively to upskill your resident population or work with your employer base locally to support them with being able to recruit people in with the right skills that they need. Finally, one of the other use cases, just want to mention that in terms of an evidence base and an understanding of not just the employers within your area or the sectoral presence, but also the supply chain that you have within an area to support employers moving in and to attract new employers into an area. And we'll look a bit more at that in next week's webinar. Now, I just want to take a pause for breath just to see whether there are any questions.
No, we have no questions, Will. You did a good job.
Okay. Yeah, but if you do have any questions, feel free to pop those through to me. You'll have an email, as Debbie mentioned, which will explain a number of things. We'll share the slides that we've gone through, and like I said, we'll share this link within the email. You can book a 30-minute session, really to look at your area. Obviously, we've looked here, we used West Midlands, and we looked at national insight. But I think there's a value in spending a bit of time looking at your area, and hopefully you see the value in that as well. And if you do book a session, there are limited spaces, partly because it's a My Diary, which is filling up already. So do book now. Do also want to mention next week's webinar, slightly different focus on next week's webinar. We'll be looking much more at industry data, sector strengths, and what that can tell us, not just about the here and now, but also in terms of planning activity. And then the final one, it's going to be focused on re-emerging demand and also on green jobs as well, which seems to be a recurring theme in terms of conversations that I'm having with our customers, in terms of opportunities that they see in terms of this kind of opportunity to almost reset or refresh or refocus. So yeah, do book yourselves in if you haven't already for those sessions. And if you want a consultation, make contact. Also, just finally wanted to mention that this Wednesday, we've got one of our wider strategic webinars, which is looking at education supply and how that aligns with labour market demand. And we've got some new insight to share on that in terms of further education supply and against employer demand. And that's on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope to see you, well, not see you, to hear from you. And I do also hope that you'll join us for next week's webinar. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, you use the same link as you did today for your next webinar. Okay, have a good day. Bye.